afternoon, Patriots. This is the American Vision, brought to you and broadcast for you on the TLBTV network and brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Project. I'm your host, Bill Muckler, and I'm coming to you from my home studio in Cocoa, Florida on America's beautiful Atlantic Space Coast. And today I have a special guest, Patrick Bergy, and Patrick is coming to us from the other side of Florida. And I believe, Patrick, you're in Newport Richey?
Clearwater.
In the Clearwater area. Okay. So anyway, Patrick, welcome to the show. It's so good to be able to meet up with you and talk with you. And we've talked a little bit before we recorded. And Patrick, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what led up to your life that changed in 2005.
Well, I originally, when I came back in 2015, I wrote a book, right? And the book was originally to tell the story from 2005 to when my basically career ended in 2015 to my kids, right? Because I had spent almost 7 years deployed between Iraq, Afghanistan, and South Korea. It's a long time to be away from your kids. So I wanted to sort of explain to them why I did what I did. But then as the 2016 election started unfolding, I started seeing a lot of things come out that I had been directly involved with, and it really deeply concerned me. So I shifted the focus of my book from telling the story to my kids to telling the story to the country, okay? So the book really starts out when I ran for election for Supervisor of Elections office in Pasco County. This was in 2004. They were all pushing to get the touchscreen voting machines, and I thought it was stupid. I had a cyber background. I've been doing computers for years, and I thought that was a really bad idea. They were really expensive. They didn't provide a paper trail, and nobody wanted them. So I wasn't able to get heard and thought that, well, maybe people would listen if I ran. So I ran for election supervisor against a guy named Kurt Browning in Pasco County. He was a 26-year Democrat that had just switched to the Republican Party about midway through his previous term. So I ran with no political affiliation, lost predictably, but ended up with almost 18% of the vote, which is pretty respectable for no political affiliation. And after that, I was deciding, what am I going to do? I had a wife and 2 kids, a nice home, and a pretty nice job. I was working, an IT guy, working for a heart and vascular clinic in Tampa. But I had seen so many things wrong, and I wanted to try to really make a difference, especially after 9/11. So I spoke to my wife and asked her what she thought about me enlisting in the Army. And she was fully supportive of it. And I went down. I was 39 at the time. I went down to the reserves, and they told me that I was too old. So, but then a couple months later, they called me back and said, hey, we just basically lowered our standards, and we just still like to come in. They had raised the age to 39, and I was a little over a month away from turning 40. So I went down, so I went down, did the enlistment, and within, I think, a week, I was on a bus on my way to basic training because it was the last window based on my age that I would be able to get in. So I went through basic training. It was pretty unique experience. Like I said to you earlier, what I was told by the people at Fort Benning was I was the first one at the age of 40 without any prior military background to complete basic training in Fort Benning's history. So that's sort of cool. I didn't bring the best run time to the table or the best PT scores, but I brought a lot of almost a decade of commercial computer security in different computer tools to the table with me for that.
Yeah, listen,
So,
you have my admiration and respect because when I went through, I was like 22 and it was really difficult physically on me and everybody else. In fact, everybody struggled. So, gosh, I guess you really got into pretty good shape real quick.
yeah. Oh, yes, I did. And it's a really funny story. It's one of the best parts, I think, of the book. Sort of unique. The Army was trying to figure out how to deal with a 40-year-old private, and a 40-year-old private's trying to figure out, oh, what is this? The Army. I sort of was expecting a full metal jacket. When I got there, it was more like stripes, right? I mean, you had soldiers in formation that were literally talking on their cell phones, and I couldn't believe, like, there were a lot of guys that were there and really were focused and really wanted to be there and trying hard, and you had a lot of guys that really just, they were there either go to war or go to jail type situation, and they brought a great lack of discipline to what otherwise would have been a pretty good experience.
Yeah,
So,
that's amazing that you actually, there were probably recruits that you went through boot camp with that were young enough to be your children.
pretty much every one of them. And even the highest in my command was, I think the oldest person in my chain of command was in his mid-30s. So I was twice the age of every drill sergeant there. And, I was certainly the old man, grandpa.
Okay, so but you had an IT background. So once you graduated from boot camp, what happened then? Where did you go?
Well, I went to AIT at Fort Benning. I was doing signal support, so I was information management officer, and went to Fort Benning. But because of my background and certifications, I actually, I think it was like normally like an 18 or 28-week course. I actually fast-tracked that course in a matter of a couple of weeks. I just tested out of every course until I got to the satellite communications, which I didn't have experience in. Then I dropped into there and really finished AIT in just a matter of a couple of weeks. And when I came back to my unit and went to ended up at MacDill just shortly afterwards at JCSE. Basically, I helped stand up the JCSE ARE, the Army Reserve element there. They had just been funded and was just standing up. I think maybe I was one of the first 10 soldiers that actually went to JCSE. And this is really tip of the spear stuff, right? It's a right, it provided the comms for CENTCOM, right? I mean, so we were tip of the spear wherever we went. I helped a lot, actually, even though I was one of the only privates there. Almost everybody in this unit was a sergeant or above. So it was really unique for me to even be part of this organization here, and I feel truly blessed for that. But after I got back from my deployment in Afghanistan, I was like virtually broke. The salary of a private when you've got a wife, now 4 kids. I ended up with twin sons after AIT. So a wife, a mortgage, a minivan, and 4 kids on the salary of a private's pretty tough, right? So I needed work when I got back from my Afghanistan deployment. I took a job with a contracting company called Dynology, where I went as a contractor this was in 2008 now, or 2007. I went as a contractor to Baghdad, where I was tasked with basically converting the Force Psychological Operations Group from dropping flyers from like airplanes to a more micro-targeted social media psychological warfare. The exact same thing we indicted the Russians for was the capability I was building. I don't go into anything that we may or may not have done with it as it pertains to any thing that would be classified, right? I don't go into the dissemination process, but because we made this product commercially available, what I'm able to talk about is the shadow net in itself, because we have public flyers and such on that. The interesting part about this that I think your viewers should pay attention to is that the company that I worked for was a very small company. It was called Dynology. I answered directly to the president of the company. Like I said, there were maybe 15 to 20 people at any one given time, most of them family members that ran it, and then a few developers and such like myself that worked at lower levels. But I answered directly to Jim Jones, the president of the company, the whole time I was in Iraq. Every day I communicated with him. Now, Jim Jones is the son of General James Jones, who was the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, former Commandant of the Marines. He was he retired a 4-star, and he was then tapped by Obama to be the National Security Advisor, right? Yes. So this guy who's been in all of these positions since 2000 has owned a company that was a defense contracting company, right? So he's making millions of dollars on defense contracts. At the same time, he is in these positions: Commandant of the Marine Corps, NATO Supreme Allied Commander. And so I ask your listeners, right? Is it a great idea to have someone who's in charge of, the war to be profiting from it? I mean, what incentive does he really have to end the war if he's adding to his wine cellar in the process, right? So General Jones owns this company. I'm working for the company. I'm developing this tactical black psyop social media psychological warfare applications for the Department of Defense, right? We lose the rebid on the contract in 2008. And I go back to the States and jump on another contract where we had kept the intellectual property rights for the black psyop product, the shadow net, that we had been paid for and developed by taxpayers, right? So you've got a taxpayer-funded contract that the general is, his company is paid to do. But when we left and we lost the contract, the company that came in and won the bid, they now had to rebuild the same application, same capabilities that we had spent a year developing and perfecting. This company had to come in and rebuild them at taxpayer expense because Dynology, General Jones, kept the intellectual property rights and then took the IP rights to that software back to another contract that he had just gotten for CENTCOM at MacDill. And we then licensed that same software back to the Department of Defense. So really it's double dipped on this, and taxpayers ended up paying twice to build and start from scratch again the same product we had built for the Force Psychological Operations Group, right? So it's an extremely, I think you've been to my website, you've seen the marketing slicks for Dynology that shows what the shadow net is, and I just, I ask you, does that not look exactly like what the FBI indicted the 13 Russians for?
Yes, exactly. And what you were doing in a sense, and from what I read, is you were the tip of the spear, to use your term, of fake news in social media, because that's in a sense what you were doing.
That's what we were building. Yes, that's what we were. The skill set we were providing to the Force Psychological Operations Group, and then made commercially available. And I would add one very key and interesting point, that at the same time we are building and using this capability, right? Our preferred partner with Dynology's number one preferred partner was another company called 3EDC. That company was owned by Paul Manafort. It was only a small, I think he owned it, and what he would do is he would get a job and then he would subcontract out the work to other people. So Paul Manafort's being accused at the same time of using black psyop social media, micro-targeted social media to influence the 2010 Ukrainian elections, right? This is exactly what international courts and others have accused him of doing. Now, how is he going to do this is the question I ask you, and that's a question that nobody ever seems to ask. You see the mainstream media and you see everybody coming out saying, well, you see Obama coming out and saying, I can't believe this happened. And I look at that and go, really? I actually built the same thing for you. So are you saying that you didn't think someone else was going to use it against us? But you see other people coming out, saying that, I can't believe that this would happen. And they were actually directly involved with it. You see people pointing at Paul Manafort, and you ask yourself, well, okay, you're pointing all these people out, but has anyone asked the question how they would do it, right? Paul Manafort, actually Dynology, the company I worked for, General Jones was a lifelong friend of John McCain. His son, Jim, Jim's first job was as an unpaid intern for the McCain, for the McCain campaign years ago, right? So they have a very close relationship to John McCain. Now, John McCain's campaign in 2008, Dynology, through the primary, I'm trying to be very careful because I'm accurate with this, through the primary process of John McCain's campaign, Dynology was providing IT support and IT security. I didn't have anything to do with it, but Dynology, I was in Iraq at that time. After the primary was over and McCain won the primary, the RNC came in, pushed Dynology out, and put Paul Manafort in, right? So Paul Manafort has John McCain's campaign literally shows receipts through the campaign records of almost $3 million between what they paid Paul Manafort and what the RNC paid Paul Manafort for what was called micro-targeted social media services. Really? That sounds exactly like what we just accused the Russians of, and it also sounds exactly like what we were developing. And if you go to my website, you'll see a screenshot that I took of Google's Wayback, where it shows a screenshot where it shows a capture from back in 2007, 2008 timeframe, where Paul Manafort's company, 3EDC, listed Dynology as their #1 preferred partner. So there you have a direct connection between the social media psychological warfare applications that I was developing for Dynology in the Defense Department at taxpayer expense. You have that direct connection to Obama, Paul Manafort, John McCain, General Jones, when it comes to influencing the 2010 elections and potentially even the 2008 campaign against Obama, because Paul Manafort was in charge of that and was paid a lot of money. I have no idea if it was, but when your #1 preferred partner is probably one of maybe 3 companies in all of the United States with battlefield tested black psyop social media psychological warfare applications, then doesn't it bear asking the question how he did it? He certainly didn't call up the Geek Squad and say, hey, I want to use black psyop projects to use social media to influence the 2010 Ukrainian election, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't call up Geek Squad for that. What do? So I think that's a very important point that people need to understand when they are looking at things that are happening today, right? What happened today, or since 2016 with the election, is actually these are things that have been put in place for years back, right? and have been being developed. The ability to, what you see today, I believe, the Senator of the Congress has YouTube in front of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care what YouTube says or does, it's an extremely powerful tool that they've actually tested themselves as having the ability to influence the outcome of an election, right? And you have now an industry really that has grown out of this, a fake news industry. So when the president says that there is fake news, and that I have screenshots that I put up on my website of tweets the president has made about how there are literally journalists that work for organizations, news organizations, legitimate news organizations, that are literally funded by contracting companies that are hired to do black psyop information operations, influence operations, right? So you have President Trump literally saying that this is possible, and you have somebody like me who does not have, I'm not a classification authority. I can't say either way what we did or didn't do with the technology we created, but I can certainly say from the bottom of my heart, at the top of my voice, that you should listen to your president when he says these things. Very important.
Well, as I'm trying to understand all this, and I think I understand it, but I don't know if I can articulate it. It sounds like the military-industrial complex is behind all this, and there's a very incestuous of nepotism or something like that, because what you're saying is all these people are really pretty much in bed with each other.
Absolutely. I mean, you have, granted, our program was started under Bush, but it was massively expanded under Obama. And the people that are controlling these programs are these the best people, the most trusted people? I published an article today, a direct result, something that resulted directly from my book, a chapter like a page 100, where I wrote a chapter about this thing I called the Pedophile Chronicles. Somebody read that after I published my book last year and contacted a federal agency. Those federal agents contacted me and asked me if it was true. And I said, absolutely. They came out to my house and we sat for a couple hours, sworn under oath, right? Penalty of perjury to federal agents, testimony as to what happened during that. And it's exactly as I laid out in my book. I busted a contractor with a top secret clearance who was downloading pornography of underage boys having sex with old men, all right? This poses a direct threat of blackmail by foreign or domestic threat actors when people do this, right? So it's a huge thing when you have a clearance to be doing that, and the fact I caught it was great. I submitted an official report on it. That report didn't make it outside our chain of command, to my knowledge. I sent the report to Jim Jones, my boss at the time. His dad's office was right directly next door. If he didn't tell his dad, explain to me why, right? I imagine his dad wants to know everything that's going on. And when one of his biggest contracts, most important contracts, just had a report filed on it that it was an MPRI L3 contractor was busted downloading pornography of underage boys with old men, I can't imagine Jim Jones, the son, not walking into the office next door and saying, Dad, we've got a problem, right? So unless you can explain to me that that didn't happen, I want to know if General Jones was aware of this cover-up, because what they did is they boiled down to the fact that if we pushed my report to law enforcement, which is what should have happened, either the IG, JAG, or CID, Had we done that, it would have jeopardized the contract. They said immediately, I'm out of a job, $240,000, and the mission would be in jeopardy. To me, the mission being in jeopardy was equally as important as the financial loss I would take. This is 2008 and our economy's crashing, but it's not something I'm proud of either. And I actually write in the book that this was sort of a way for me to get this off my chest. I'm, like I said, a father of 4. And even though I did exactly what I was required to do, I'm the information assurance security officer. I detected this threat. I reported it. My job is done there for all intentional purposes. However, I've always regretted not taking that over their head to the IG myself. Could I have done it? Yes. Would they have just destroyed my career eight years earlier than they ended up doing? Most likely, right? So as a result of this book, as a result of that, they came out and opened an active investigation into this. The only thing I've been told about the investigation was that the claims that I made were all verified by other people on the project, right? So everything that I claimed in it apparently has been verified by other people. But I want to know who knew and who and how, what, if anything, is going to be done to them. Think about it. Dynology took components of the ShadowNet, okay? And they, in 2013, after the Snowden incident, Dynology, Jim Jones, and General Michael Hayden, the former CIA director, right? They were actually responsible or involved with some of the regulations and such that came about after the Snowden leaks in 2013. So right after that, those new regulations put compliance requirements on companies to do things, to take steps to mitigate the potential of leaks, right? So General Jones used Dynology to, right, like starting in 2013, right after that law was passed, to develop an application called ClearForce. The ClearForce application actually took components that we had developed and capabilities we had developed from the ShadowNet and tied them into real-time criminal background and real-time travel background checks. So let's say if you get pulled over for drunk driving on the weekend, the ClearForce application will know this and will report it to their customer, being your employer. Mm-hmm. It also scans both at work and when you're off work, your social media. So it uses advanced AI capabilities, scanning your social media, scanning your credit history, scanning your travel history. It puts all of these together and predictively determines whether or not you're likely to leak. This is what they're offering. So now General Michael Hayden and General Jones and Jim Jones, my direct boss, they split this ClearForce application off from Dynology, who developed it, to its own company. The company is called ClearForce. And General Hayden, General Jones, and Jim, his son, are the 3 senior founding members and board of directors on ClearForce. ClearForce is literally an application that predictively determines whether or not you are going to steal or leak, and literally could have the ability to determine whether or not you get a clearance, whether or not you lose your clearance. ClearForce is also being made available, or already been made available, for commercial purposes. So Walmart, whoever, I don't know what customer might be, but let's say Walmart decides to hire to have the ClearForce application run real-time continuous screenings of their employees. Somebody may have already lost their job or been denied employment for something that this artificial intelligence application predictively determined you were likely to do, right? Where's due process in that? So the people who are in charge and very powerful, they can control who gets clearances with our government. Think about the power you have there, right? These people, I want to know if this person who's in charge of this company, General Jones, knew about the cover-up of this pedophile, because do you want someone who covered up a pedophile to be in charge of this type? I already know his son did, right? There's no if, and, or but. The president of ClearForce, the guy day-to-day in charge of clearance and backgrounds, flat out covered up a pedophile. And if you think if you think I would say that to a 4-star general and his son without being 100% sure and able to prove it, because I would clearly have my butt suit off, then you're mistaken, right? So ask yourself this: should these people be held to a certain standard? Should we have this at all? These people were accused. These were the same people that Snowden was exposing as violating our constitutional rights. So from that, they made their own company and now just do the same thing they were accused of for the government. They do it privately and make money on it. They license this capability, black psyop social media capabilities. Imagine the databases they have. What kind of agreements do they have with YouTube and Facebook to be able to collect and access the information on social media they're claiming on their website that they have the ability to do? Should we know this, or should we just trust it because it's a private company and we should only not trust our government? I think that's a ridiculous position to be in. I actually trust my government more than I trust a private company, because my government's too incompetent to do something really, clandestine. You just go down to the DMV and see who's in charge of that cabal, right? I mean,
right.
The government, I think, has, if anything, too many checks and balances.
Right. So, Patrick, how has this affected your life? I mean, it seems like, they've got the spotlight on you. Are they after you in any way?
Well, in 2015, I had been working with Analogy on a contract for about 5 years in South Korea, right? I was providing, I was the information assurance officer, and I was doing knowledge management, content management. Somebody, I had actually filed a report in late 2013 that ended up having all my responsibilities taken away, and I just, for a year or so, just came into work every day, downloaded some videos and watched videos at $120,000 a year, because I filed a report that warned that the hardware we were backing our data up on, which it was all of the comptroller data for 30,000 soldiers in Korea, the comptroller's office, along with everything else in the J8 organization, J8, 2, 3, 4. I came out with a report, but that report threw a couple government employees under the bus because they hadn't done anything to fix it. So they complained to my program manager, and my responsibilities were taken away. After about a year or a year and a half of me just refusing to play ball with them, they gave me a small amount of my powers back. And from that, a government employee contacted me and said that GS-14, like a division chief, right? Mm-hmm. He contacts me and says, hey, I need you to give me administrative access to a secret classified network. And I said, no problem, but you need to provide the appropriate required memorandums and signed off by an 06 or above and take this particular course. This is administrative access to a classified network. He could delete or do anything he wanted to. We're protecting people from themselves by making sure of this. He starts screaming and yelling at me, threatening my job over the phone so loud the contractor next to me about 10 feet away heard it. We both filed a report of abuse to our program manager. And the next day, they modified that $12 million contract I had been working on for 5 years. They modified it only to remove the requirements for my position. And 3 days after I was forced to leave that job, the same people that were in the official complaint of fraud, waste, and abuse modified the contract back to its original requirements, removing my position and replacing me, right? If there has ever been a better case for whistleblower protection, I couldn't tell you what it would be. It's as clear cut as you could make it. But apparently, even though it says on the IG's website that contractors were protected under whistleblowers, they really aren't, right? So I trusted the IG's website. I trusted my government to stand behind me and protect me, even after a year and a half of being punished for writing another report, right? When I left, I was destroyed. I came back and I tried to get unemployment insurance. Jim Jones, the president of the company, literally contacted the unemployment office and said I didn't quit. I resigned. Well, how do you resign from a contract they just modified and removed you from? I didn't even get unemployment. I was denied unemployment after paying into it for 8 years, being overseas 7 of those in Iraq and in South Korea, right? This is how they treat you. These are the people that are responsible for this. Whether or not the claims that I made about this guy's abuse ever happened never mattered to anyone. I was never given that due process, right? Because I wasn't protected. So they never investigated that. They'll never investigate anything. And imagine, I'm kind of guessing any whistleblower that comes forward is going to have even a harder time to get their story out. But that's sort of beginning to end on where I am now. Yeah, they destroyed me financially in every single way, right down to where I get my hospitalization and health insurance through the VA now. Some Catholic Charities programs and the Veterans Association, veterans groups have helped me out too. But yeah, they've absolutely, they absolutely did everything that they could to destroy me and my family, right? But they didn't really destroy me. They didn't destroy my will to hold them accountable, right? I didn't enlist in the Army at 40 because I was a pansy and wanted to sit around and not do anything that I saw when I saw something wrong. I did it, and I'm pushing forward on this because I think it's incredibly important people understand who these people are. And these are the same people you hear about every day. Paul Manafort, the same people you hear about that are playing around with our politics right now. You just don't hear. You just never knew the connection between Manafort and Jones, right? Why is that? Washington Post has known about this for over a year. They told me, well, it's a great story. We looked into it for about a week and a half with you. It's a great story, but it doesn't impact, it doesn't show the president. You know, how does this show that Trump did something wrong or was colluding with Russians? I said, it doesn't show that the president was colluding with Russians. It shows that Obama was doing the same things that the Russians were doing, and that's largely why the Russians did it to us. We messed with their Ukrainian elections, so they messed with us, right? So, but because it didn't help out the Washington Post trashing Trump, they instead of going with my story, which is so easily verifiable on every single level, instead of going with my story, they went with some story about a woman who 40 years earlier got bumped up to first class on a flight and Donald Trump was rude to her or something. Never reported it, no. So that's how the Washington Post works. Anything that they can do to harm the president. And can I throw one more thing in here real quick? Sure. Khashoggi, right? General Jones, this is all IIA, right? We dealt with the manipulation of fake news. We dealt with the ability to create news, with the ability to hire reporters and hire, foreign nationals if we wanted to. We had these capabilities who would work for legitimate news organizations, or news organizations, let's say, that someone might just create as part of an IIAI. We had all of these capabilities, right? So, and I'm not saying we did any of them, but these are capabilities that we have. So if you know that, with me, like me knowing that, when I see the Khashoggi story, and I see that Khashoggi was working with the Washington Post, which is as dirty and corrupt as you can get, even from my personal experience, not just taking Donald Trump's word for it. I've worked with these people, and they are just bad, just bad examples of our fourth estate. If you knew, and I'm not saying that he did, but would it change your opinion of the Khashoggi incident if you knew that he was a paid contractor hired to work for the Washington Post, potentially even on the Washington Post getting money for this too, by a company like, let's say, Dynology or Jones International, who actually has a lot of Saudi Arabia business ties. That's in the Washington Post right now, or another Washington Times. They just showed that Jones International has big financial ties with contracts with the Saudis. If you knew that this Khashoggi was a paid contractor, part of an information operation, part of an IIA op, would you feel the same way about him as you do today, or about what happened to him? Would you feel this is like casualty of war? You shouldn't have done that.
This is alarming. There's no question about it. So, Patrick, how can people get your book and learn more about this? Because you're really uncovering the deep state, and I think that's what you're trying to bring to the American people.
Yes, sir. You can go to my website, victimoftheswamp.com, just common spelling, and victimoftheswamp.com has links to where you can purchase my book. The book actually is great. Here we've got like 30 minutes to tell a 10-year story, but the book, the election from the very first chapter, that's a great story. You go to the enlistment at 40, then you go through all of these things. I think anybody that reads it's going to have a much better understanding of the government, right? When I enlisted, I did it as a patriotic duty. My best friend, Fred Taylor, he's a 3-time Purple Heart recipient. Got 2 of those on Hamburger Hill, 2 days apart from each other. I have tremendous respect, always had, but I'd never served my country, right? So I go in to serve my country as a patriot. And then once I get involved with this, I find out that it's really all, on almost every level, just systemic fraud, waste, and abuse between the relationship between our government and the military-industrial complex, right? Just systemic across the board. And these are literally supported. These aren't like hypotheticals. Everything in there is supported and documented in any way that you want it. Have a conversation with me. But it is an American awakening. You have that in the background right now.
Yes. I got that from your site.
Okay, so to explain that real quick, it's kind of cool, right? Mm-hmm. One of our jobs was to help bring the Sunni and Shia together from fighting against each other for 1,000 years, right? And it was what was called the awakening, or the Sahawa. That Sahawa brought together the sons of Iraq, which inherently ended up stabilizing all the violence. They fought, the Sunni and the Shia, through the Sahawa, the awakening, fought a common enemy, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They fought with us against that common enemy. I'm trying to have an American awakening where we can show Democrats and Republicans this common enemy between our government and the military-industrial complex that nobody wants. It's not in our Constitution. Nobody asked for this, but these people have found a way to perpetuate an incredible amount of power and money, and they have just taken it to the point where it threatens the very core of our democracy. Right? And so that's what the American Awakening is about.
Okay. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for being a guest on our show and telling all this to the people. And so now everyone will know that, hey, we can be awakened, and we can find out more about this, and therefore, you know, share this with our friends and family of what's actually happening, because I continue to read stories and articles about the military-industrial complex, but what you're doing is you're really giving us an insight to it, and it's frightening.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you being able to let me get this message out, and I encourage anybody to go to my site. I'm trying to get the ability to be able to take my story in front of Congress, the Senate or the Senate Intelligence Committee, because I think they need to understand this. They don't have this information. That separation between the military-industrial complex creates like a wall that they're not going to have this knowledge, and they're making very important decisions. I see Lindsey Graham out there making this decision on Khashoggi, but I want to ask Lindsey Graham, if you knew what I knew, would you be so certain that Donald Trump is not taking the right action, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to be able to let them make decisions based on facts.
I think that's what all of us want. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Okay, boys and girls, I'm back after a short break, and I want to thank Patrick Bergy for sharing his experiences and his knowledge and wisdom of the deep state with us. And this is his book, Victim of the Swamp: How the Deep State Destroyed the 40-Year-Old Private. And so I want you to, read this book, get this book, so you can find out the real story behind all the fake news that's we're being inundated with every time we watch the news or see something on TV. We read something. We're being misled, and we're not really getting the full story on what Patrick calls the fraud and abuse of the military-industrial complexes perpetrating on we the people, on our sovereign country. So get the book and read the book and educate yourself. And while you're doing that, there's another book I'd like you to get, and that's 2020: A Clear Vision for America. So you need to be educated so you can talk with your friends and family and give them facts and bring them along, so we can finally get to a point where we can protect ourselves from what's happening with this military-industrial complex and this insidious deep state we have in our government. So, hey everybody, I always say, where there is no vision, the people perish, and where Americans have no vision, the American people will perish. So, get the book, get the 2020: A Clear Vision for America, and God bless our active duty personnel. God bless all of our vets. And God bless you, our viewers, for watching, and thank you so much. And God save our America, because we need you now more than ever before.